Good morning. Hope everybody's doing well based on the given circumstances. I was really excited to give my presentation in front of the class face to face, but due to everything going on, I understand. But I really am excited to talk about Mr. Gary Wright Snow. He is 83, and I kind of want to do my presentation a little bit differently. Based off a lot of the ones I watched, they were super informative, and which is awesome. I definitely wanted to make sure my presentation is informative and gives you a good narrative of Mr. Snow's life. But I also want to take some time to explain the relational aspect of it. I think that was kind of the backdrop of this assignment, was to get more relational equity with some senior citizens. And Mr. Snow has become a very good friend of mine, which I'm looking forward to talk to you later on in my presentation. So I do want to get some time, knock out some of the informative stuff and maybe some of the more dense topics so that I can move on to some of the more relational aspects, which maybe will be a little bit more interesting. So Mr. Snow, like I said, he's 83. He was born and raised in Oshkosh, Nebraska. Those are some of his early memories in Oshkosh. Actually, ever since he was a very young child, was actually working. And I think that is a good term to coin for the rest of Mr. Snow's life is just that, it's working. He's an extremely hard worker, but he also enjoys it. And so I think that the roots of that kind of started at his time in Oshkosh. Some of his earliest memories were working on his father Murray and his mother Patrice's lumber yard that he actually grew up on. And so he was kind of explaining it to me that they would have these train boxcars come in and they would just be full of coal and lumber. And him and his four brothers would have to go in and shovel out all the coal, or they would have to pick up and transfer all the lumber to the places where it needed to go throughout the lumber yard. And he really emphasized to me the importance of his job, and kind of explained why he was working since such a young age. He said that many businesses and many schools, even in his community, ran off of the coal and the lumber that was found in his father's lumber yard. And so he really emphasized again how important it was that he was there to do that job and to work so that many businesses could do their practice in his community. And so he said, he mentioned how work has never been work to him. Even at a young age, he never saw shoveling coal and lifting up a lot of lumber as extensive labor, but he really saw it as a good time to spend time with his brothers, who were his best friends at a young age, and they were just able to spend a lot of time together. He also mentioned enjoying it a lot because it allowed him the opportunity to miss school a lot. His parents had a lot of leeway with him going to school since he had to be working with his brothers. And like I said, it was such an important role to the community, so he was able to miss school a lot. So that kind of explains a lot of his school time throughout grade school and even going into middle school. But at the end of middle school and going into high school, around 8th grade, I guess what would be nowadays going into 9th grade, Mr. Snow and his family moved to Crook, Colorado. His father, Murray, received a offer to acquire a small piece of land that he could start a farm on. And so Crook was also closer to a lot of other family members that Mr. Snow had living in Colorado. So they decided to pick up their family and move to Crook, Colorado. Mr. Snow notes that it was a big life change for him. Obviously growing up in a new community and getting adjusted and whatnot. So a couple things he mentioned about Crook, Colorado was he actually said this verbatim, that the wind never stops. I thought that was really funny. And because of that, he said that he would oftentimes get stuck in these week-long blizzards. He said week-long blizzards were just kind of the norm. And I think based off his prior experience with lumber and coal, he had a lot of good resources and a lot of good skills to stay warm during that. But amongst Crook, he ended up going to Crook High School. And there, I really think Mr. Snow's life of excellency started. I know I'm going to talk about that more later, but I think pretty much everything Mr. Snow did, he did extremely well. He's a very intelligent man and a very hard worker, and I think some of those roots started to take ground when he was in Oshkosh working for his dad, but also in high school. Mr. Snow went to a pretty small school, and Crook High wasn't a very big school, but because of that, he was offered a lot of leadership positions and a lot of ways to grow. So there he was the first thing he actually mentioned in Crook was that he was the Sunday school superintendent. He was most proud of that accomplishment, which I thought was super funny because he's got some other very impressive accolades as well. But he also was the captain of the football team. He played quarterback. He was also the president of the FFA program, so the Future Farmers of America program. He was also a starter on his baseball team and his track team and his wrestling team as well. And After all that, he also played the tuba in the school band, so he was constantly going back and forth between music and sports. Some fun things and memories that he remembers from Crook, Colorado in high school. He said that was one of the best times of his life, just kind of to have a lack of responsibility, I guess, as a young individual. He said for fun, his friends would really just drive around, which I thought was pretty funny. He told me a story about how they would kind of go off-roading and whatnot in their buddies' trucks because only a couple of them could drive at the time. And then they would just get super stuck in the mud and in the snow and then just try to get out of it. And I guess that's all you have to do for fun in Crook, Colorado. So that was kind of funny. So post-high school, Mr. Snow and four of his friends actually joined the Navy. Mr. Snow mentioned to me how bad he wanted to go to college, but he realized that that wasn't just very realistic because he didn't have the money to pay for it, and his family didn't really have the means to support him through college as well. So he made a very spontaneous decision to join the Navy with four of his buddies. So for 2 years, Mr. Snow was a yeoman. Which pretty much means he spent a lot of time on landing boats. So you kind of see those in movies about how a lot of boats come in and these giant landing boats, and he spent a lot of time on that working as a yeoman. After that 2 years of working as a yeoman, he later moved on to working in office with new enlistees and kind of just placing new enlistees into the desirable spot in the Navy that they wanted. So Mr. Snow mentioned that he actually did join the Navy because he was looking to get a GI Bill. And what the GI Bill really did was it gave you a select amount of money if you spent a certain amount of time in service to go to school. And so actually 6 months before Mr. Snow joined the Navy, the GI Bill was canceled. And so there was no such thing more as the GI Bill. And so he was pretty distraught about that, but he was already in the Navy. And actually during boot camp, right after boot camp that he joined the Navy, he reconnected with an old high school friend named Shirley Northup, and they got married and later had 2 kids during his time in the Navy. But again, Mr. Snow really wanted to go to college. So luckily, the United States government passed the National Defense Act of 1958, in other words, which is kind of like this Student Loan Act. And so that allowed him to take out a loan so that he could go to college. And so he finished up his time in the Navy, immediately went to college. So Mr. Snow went to Colorado State College, other words known today as Northern Colorado State. Mr. Snow, again, as I mentioned earlier, continued on a life of excellency. His time in college absolutely baffled me. Me personally, I finished college in 3 years, and so I'm going to get my master's degree this summer. Mr. Snow finished college in 2 years, and he got a degree in chemistry, a minor in physics, a minor in mathematics, a minor in education, and a minor in physical science, and he finished that all in 2 years. So that absolutely, I had to pick my jaw off the floor after he mentioned that, and I was just like, I don't even understand how that's possible. And he mentioned it was possible because he took 18 hours every semester, and that was actually kind of a lighter load for him. He would take 20 hours sometimes nonstop. But like I mentioned earlier, he married Shirley Northup, and they actually had 2 kids named Robin and Debbie. And so later on in college, he realized that he had to get done faster so that he could support his family. And so it's very notable of him to do. So like I said, he graduates college in 2 years. He actually had the opportunity to get his master's degree in chemistry 8 months after he graduated. But he said that he was missing a intro class and then a senior seminar class, and he realized it just wasn't worth the wait. So he moved on. He got a job immediately after college at the AEC, which stands for the Atomic Energy Commission. Some funny memories that he had right out of there. He said right when he started at the AEC, actually some of the normal laborers were on strike. So he got in kind of as with a college degree and whatnot, and educated as head over a bunch of these laborers, but they were on strike. And so he mentions how he spent most of the first couple months there doing laundry, which I thought was kind of funny. So at AEC, what AEC really was is it's an atomic bomb facility. And so what they do is they build atomic bombs. And what Mr. Snow did, he quickly moved on up in the company within the first year there, and he found himself as the head of a department that runs something called the mass spectrometer. And so the mass spectrometer would later become a key part in Mr. Snow's life, running the mass spectrometer. So what a mass spectrometer is, and I hope I do it enough justice because I really, really tried to understand it, but it is just kind of over my head. And so what it is it separates isotopes so that you can analyze which materials have the most energetic isotopes, and so that you can manipulate those materials to that most energetic isotope so it can be most reactive to create a bomb, obviously. And so extremely, extremely, extremely interesting. And so Mr. Snow worked at the Atomic Energy Commission for 2 years. He later moved on. So his boss was actually offered a position to start another AEC facility in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so it would kind of be a different facility, but his boss was offered that job offer, and he accepted, and he actually took Mr. Snow with him because he was so informative about the mass spectrometer. So at the age of 29, Mr. Snow moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Him and his family, him and Shirley and Robin and Debbie, his 2 kids, they moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma. And at this AEC facility, they also kept working with the mass spectrometer, but they also were the main place in the United States that would test radioactive materials. So a bunch of companies would come to their company and present radioactive materials and make sure that they were testable and that they were safe for the community to be used. So again, super interesting. Mr. Snow worked there for 5 years, and at the time that he was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, he actually moved into the sales department because him and a colleague developed a new type of mass spectrometer. It was a little bit more condensed version, and I actually have the catalog and the pamphlet here that I was looking forward to pass around in our class. But this is actually the pamphlet that Mr. Snow used to, when he was in sales, to go around and present his lab, first of all, and what they do as work, but also to show off some of the mass spectrometer. And so I have a lot of pictures in my PowerPoint as well. But this is kind of a picture of the mass spectrometer. It's a very impressive machine, obviously, but Mr. Snow moved into sales, so he would take this pamphlet or something like this and go around the country and try to sell this to different labs and different companies to come use their lab and use their mass spectrometer. So super interesting, and again, Mr. Snow did that for 5 years, and then he actually got a job offer from a company called CEC. CEC was based in Dallas, but they had a bunch of sales facilities all across the country. So Mr. Snow accepted that position, but he was going to move based off what sale office they offered him. So him and his wife flew out to Boston, which was the first one that he was offered, and he noted that him and his wife just didn't enjoy Boston too much. And since they declined their offer in Boston, he was offered a position at the Atlanta location. So that's how Mr. Snow made his way down to the Peach State. He moves down to Atlanta, and then almost instantly within the first year of working for CEC gets bought out by a company called DuPont. And so DuPont is actually the largest chemical manufacturer in the country, and it's the second largest chemical manufacturer in the world. And so they bought out CEC, which was the company Mr. Snow just signed for. And so Mr. Snow actually ended up working for DuPont for the next 42 years. He spent 10 years in the instrumentation department, so he was still kind of working with some of the mass spectrometer type devices. And then he also spent the next 32 years in the electronics department, still working with radioactive materials and whatnot. During the move to his time to Georgia and to Atlanta, unfortunately, Mr. Snow and Shirley did get divorced. So he mentioned how it was kind of heartbreaking for him, and he just kind of had a void for loneliness during that time because he was working a lot, and he was in a place in the first time of his life where he wasn't traveling too much. And so 7 years later, actually, since him and Shirley got divorced, he married a woman named Sandy. Sandy actually died 7 years later of a brain tumor. After Shirley, Mr. Snow, 4 years later, remarried a woman named Janice that he was married to for 11 years, and they got divorced in 2008. And so when talking with Mr. Snow about some of his past marriages, I tried my best to kind of pull out some information, but it just didn't seem like something he wanted to talk about too much, and he was kind of more closed off to talk about. So that's why I don't have any pictures of Sandy and Janice, or Sandy and surely in my PowerPoint, because those are just really tough times for him, and he hasn't really held on to too many of those photos and whatnot. So he was kind of more closed off to talk about that. So I figured it would just be best to move on there and to kind of move on. But like I said, he married Janice, and 11 years later, in 2008, they get divorced. So actually, at Mr. Snow's time in DuPont, before him and Janice got married, they offered a lot of these 60-plus-year-old residents and workers and whatnot a retirement package so they could retire. They were kind of doing some downsizing, Mr. Snow was telling me. So he said he accepted that offer. He thought it was a great deal, and he knew that he could just move on to something else in his life. And so he retires at the age he retires after working there for 42 years, and he retires at 60 or 50, 65. And so he retires at DuPont. And quickly after retiring, Mr. Snow, like I said earlier, he knew he would kind of dive into the next venture for him. And for him, it was something that he always wanted to do, and that was teaching. So Mr. Snow actually applied to a bunch of private schools around the metro Atlanta area. And the first one to hit him back was Loganville Christian Academy, and where he was hired there. And he ended up working there for 14 years as the chemistry and physics teacher. So he retires from LCA, teaching there at 78. He said that was one of the best times of his life. Since it was a Christian school, he kind of had that faith kind of agreement there. And so he was able to invest in a lot of young individuals and whatnot. He was also the golf coach, which I always thought that was super interesting at the age of 78. He's totally incredible. So after he retires at 78 from LCA, he takes a year off and travels a little bit, spends a lot of time. He actually gets remarried to a woman named Virginia, who I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. But then after his year off of retirement at 79, Mr. Snow decides he's not done yet. And so he actually accepts a job to continue teaching chemistry and physics at Scholars Guilds Academy, which is where he's currently employed today. He's still working and still teaching. And so he's absolutely loving it. He mentioned to me that his absolute hero in life was a man out in Colorado that taught until he was 104. He said that was his hero, and he looks to be a model of that, and I thought that was absolutely incredible. So he's still teaching today, and that's currently where he's employed. And so moving on into the relational aspect of it, so I actually met Mr. Snow because my brother goes to LCA, which is really funny. And at a basketball game, my dad had met Mr. Snow sitting next to him, and I've mentioned a couple times in class I have a really interesting family dynamic. I kind of have an older father, he's 77, and I actually have, my mom is from the Philippines. And so what's funny is Virginia, who married Mr. Snow, is Filipino, and my mom has been working at Chick-fil-A for over 20 years. She's kind of like a hometown legend here in Loganville for working there so long and working in the drive-thru. She's the sweetest woman I've ever met. And so my mom met Virginia in the drive-thru, and they instantly connected because they were Filipino. And then my dad met Mr. Snow at LCA at a basketball game. And this all happened right in the time of this project. And I was like, this would be perfect. I can just interview Mr. Snow. And so I interview him. And we become really close friends. My parents invite his family over, so Virginia and Mr. Snow to come over for dinner, and we just have been instantly connecting since then. And so me and Mr. Snow kind of have a good friendship, a good relationship, and actually ever since my interview with him, the incredible thing is that oftentimes when I'm up at school, and my brother is at school as well, so when I'm up in Kennesaw, my brother's at school, he's a senior this year, and my mom is at work. My dad, for several hours, is just kind of here left alone and kind of just doing errands and whatnot and trying to fill in time. So ever since my interview, Mr. Snow and my dad have actually been hanging out a good bit. So Mr. Snow will just kind of come over randomly, which is really funny because my dad mentions how every time he hears that knock on the door, it's right after he's heated up his lunch, and it just never fails. So Mr. Snow kind of shows up unexpectedly whenever he's got a free pass to come into our house, and he'll spend a couple hours just with my dad, just talking and I guess keeping each other young. And so, like I said, I really wanted to highlight the informational aspect, but also the relational aspect, because Mr. Snow is now a part of my life. So I'm super thankful for this project because it actually introduced him and to give him and my father that relationship, him and his family that relationship. And so I asked Mr. Snow if he had any advice to give to people my age and to our class. And a lot of the things he said I've actually held on to a lot. So the first thing he said was that the biggest change in his life over all the years has been his attitude towards money. I thought that was super interesting. I kind of expected something a little bit different. But his attitude towards money said that was the largest change that he ever had in his life. And second, he mentioned that you always have to go out to find opportunities, and that opportunities will never come looking for you. You have to go out and find them yourself. That was really encouraging to me as I graduate this summer and I'm diving into the next ventures, chasing some of my dreams and whatnot. So that was very encouraging, and I hope it's encouraging to you. But Mr. Snow, he's lived an incredible life. Like I said, I'm very blessed to have him as a part of my life now. So again, I'm thankful for this project, and I hope everybody enjoyed, and everybody kind of will be encouraged to look around and settle down in the noise of our generation and our culture to look around at the people around them and take the time to get to know them, because they may become a part of your life too. So thank you, and have a good one.